In the vast darkness between stars, where the cold vacuum strips away everything but the hardest truths, humanity has earned a reputation that makes even the most battle-hardened alien species whisper warnings to their young. They call us the Iron Hearts, beings who can stare into the abyss of war and never blink, who can make the impossible choices that others cannot stomach. But what happens when an Iron Heart meets something that challenges everything they believe about duty, honor, and the price of survival? What happens when a human warrior, forged in the crucible of endless conflict, discovers that the greatest battle isn't against an enemy but against the walls they've built around their own soul? This is the story of Commander Sarah Chan, whose hands have dealt death across a dozen star systems, whose tactical brilliance has saved millions of lives, and whose heart has grown colder than the void she travels through. It's the story of an alien child who sees past the armor, past the reputation, past the carefully constructed barriers of a professional soldier. Sometimes redemption comes not from victory in battle, but from learning to be human again. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't charging into enemy fire, it's allowing yourself to care. In a universe where humanity's strength is legendary, one warrior is about to discover that their greatest weakness might actually be their most profound gift. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, her gray eyes reflecting the cold starlight that filtered through the reinforced viewports. The tactical display before her painted a grim picture in shades of red and amber: enemy positions, casualty reports, resource depletion warnings. Another day, another battlefield. Another chance to prove why humans had earned their fearsome reputation across the galaxy. "Commander, incoming transmission from Fleet Command," announced Lieutenant Morrison, his voice carrying the same mechanical precision that had become standard among her crew. Emotions were luxuries they couldn't afford. "Patch it through," Sarah replied, her tone as flat as the vacuum outside. She had learned long ago that inflection was weakness, that any crack in her professional facade could cost lives. The holographic projection of Admiral Voss materialized before her, his weathered face bearing the familiar expression of a man delivering unpleasant news. "Commander Chen, we have a situation on Kepler 442b. The Zephyrian colony there has gone dark. Intelligence suggests it's not a communication failure." The Admiral's words carried weight that settled like lead in Sarah's stomach, though her expression never changed. "Hostile action?" she asked, already running through tactical possibilities in her mind. The Kepler system was strategically vital, sitting at the junction of three major trade routes. Its loss would create a domino effect across the sector. Unknown. The last transmission mentioned strange energy readings and, then, silence. "We're sending you in with a reconnaissance team. Exercise extreme caution, Commander. The Zephyrians aren't known for going quietly into the night." Sarah nodded curtly. The Zephyrians were one of humanity's few genuine allies in this sector of space. They were a peaceful species, more interested in art and philosophy than warfare. If something had happened to them, it was either very bad luck or very bad news. "Understood, Admiral. ETA to Kepler 442b? 18 hours at maximum burn. Commander." The Admiral paused, something almost resembling concern flickering in his eyes. "Your psychological profile shows you haven't taken leave in 37 months. Perhaps after this mission, with respect, sir, my psychological state is optimal for mission parameters. The crew's welfare depends on consistent leadership." Sarah's interruption was polite but firm. She had no interest in discussions about her mental health. Emotions were tools to be managed, not indulged. The Admiral sighed but nodded. "Very well. Godspeed, Commander." The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with the soft hum of the ship's systems and her own thoughts. She turned back to the tactical display, already shifting gears from one crisis to the next. This was her life, an endless series of problems to solve, enemies to defeat, people to save. She was good at it. More than good. She was legendary. The crew often whispered about her behind her back. They called her the Ice Queen, the Iron Lady, the woman who never breaks. Sarah knew about the nicknames and didn't discourage them. Fear and respect were more useful than affection. A commander who was loved might hesitate at the crucial moment. A commander who was feared would be obeyed without question. "Navigator, set course for Kepler 442b.
Maximum burn, she ordered. Aye, Commander. Course laid in.
The ship's engines roared to life, pressing everyone back into their seats as the Retribution leaped forward into hyperspace. Sarah remained standing, her hand gripping the railing with practiced ease. She had made this journey between systems thousands of times, but she never tired of the moment when the stars stretched into lines and reality folded around them. In the strange blue glow of hyperspace, Sarah allowed herself a moment of introspection. She was 34 years old and had been fighting for humanity since she was 18. 16 years of war, of making impossible decisions, of carrying the weight of countless lives on her shoulders. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed genuinely, the last time she had felt anything beyond the cold satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. It wasn't always like this. She could still remember being young Sarah Chen, fresh out of the academy, full of idealism and dreams of exploring the galaxy. That woman had died somewhere along the way, probably on Proxima Prime when she had to choose between saving a transport full of civilians or preserving her tactical advantage. She had saved the civilians and lost half her fleet in the process. The lesson had been clear: emotions were a luxury that cost lives. Commander, we're receiving distress signals from multiple sources in the Kepler system, reported Communications Officer Hayes.
It's chaotic, ma'am. Multiple languages, some I don't recognize. Sarah moved to the communications console, studying the scrolling data.
The signals were fragmentary, overlapping, desperate. She could make out references to evacuation, to something coming from the outer system, to children who needed help.
Any word from the Zephyrian government, she asked. Negative, Commander. Their official channels are completely silent. But these civilian signals.
Hayes paused, his professional composure cracking slightly.
There are a lot of them, ma'am. And they're getting weaker.
Sarah felt the familiar cold certainty settle over her mind.
Whatever had happened on Kepler 442b, it was ongoing. People were dying while she traveled through hyperspace, unable to help. The thought should have frustrated her, should have made her angry or desperate. Instead, it simply hardened her resolve. Estimated time to system entry? 16 hours, 12 minutes, Commander. Too long. Engineering, can we push the engines harder? Chief Engineer Park's voice crackled over the intercom. We're already at 110% of recommended capacity, Commander. If we push harder, we risk catastrophic failure. Sarah weighed the options with mechanical precision. Risk the ship and crew to arrive a few hours earlier, or maintain safe parameters and potentially arrive too late to help anyone. It was the kind of calculation she had made countless times before. Maintain current burn, she decided. A dead ship would help no one. The next several hours passed in the familiar routine of deep space travel. Sarah toured the ship, checking with each department, reviewing tactical scenarios, ensuring that every system was functioning at peak efficiency. Her crew moved around her with the practiced choreography of professionals who had worked together for years. They trusted her. More than that, they believed in her. She could see it in the way they straightened when she entered a room, in the confidence with which they carried out her orders, in the absolute certainty that Commander Chen would find a way to complete the mission successfully. That trust was both her greatest asset and her heaviest burden. At the 14-hour mark, they began receiving clearer transmissions from the Kepler system. What they revealed made even Sarah's iron composure waver slightly. "Commander, you need to hear this," Hayes called out, his voice tight with controlled emotion. The transmission that crackled through the bridge speakers was in accented standard, the voice of a Zephyrian female, young by the sound of it. "This is Dr. Yella Vorn of the Kepler Research Station. If anyone receives this message, please help us. Something emerged from the gas giant's atmosphere 3 days ago. Ships, but not like anything in our databases. They're taking people, Commander. Taking them alive. The children, they seem particularly interested in the children." The transmission dissolved into static, but the message was clear enough. Sarah felt her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. In her experience, any species that targeted children was beyond negotiation, beyond mercy. They were simply problems to be solved with overwhelming force. Any response to our hails? She asked.
Nothing from official sources.
But we're picking up scattered civilian transmissions. It sounds like there are survivors scattered across the planet's surface. Sarah nodded grimly. What's our tactical assessment? Unknown, Commander. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Whatever took out the Zephyrian defenses did it fast and clean. Their orbital platforms are still intact but abandoned. That was troubling. The Zephyrians weren't warriors, but their defensive systems were top tier, purchased from human military contractors. Whatever had overwhelmed them possessed significant technological advantages. Prep the strike teams. Full combat loadout. If there are survivors down there, we're going to find them. Aye, Commander. As the crew scrambled to prepare for what was likely to be a combat situation, Sarah retreated to her quarters for the first time in days. The small space was spartanly furnished: a bed, a desk, a few personal items that served more as reminders of her duty than sources of comfort. A photo of her graduating academy class sat on the desk, faces bright with hope and determination. Half of them were dead now. She opened her weapons locker and began the ritual of preparing for battle. Her sidearm, shacked and loaded. Her combat knife, honed to a razor edge. Her personal armor, matte black ceramic plates that had saved her life more times than she could count. Each piece of equipment was like putting on pieces of herself, transforming Sarah Chen the person into Commander Chen the weapon. A soft chime indicated they were approaching system entry. Sarah sealed her helmet and made her way back to the bridge, where her crew was running through final systems checks. "Drop us out of hyperspace at the system's edge," she ordered. "I want a full tactical scan before we commit to anything." The transition back to normal space was smooth, and immediately the screens lit up with data. Kepler 442b hung before them like a blue-green jewel, but the space around it told a story of violence. Debris fields marked where ships had died, and strange energy readings emanated from multiple points on the planet's surface. "Commander, I'm reading multiple unknown vessels in orbit," reported the tactical officer. "They're not responding to hails, but they're definitely active. Power signatures are significant." Sarah studied the display, her mind automatically calculating vectors, weapons ranges, escape routes. The alien ships were sleek, organic-looking things that seemed to shift and flow even as she watched. She had never seen their like before, but she recognized predators when she saw them. Any sign of Zephyrian survivors? Scattered life signs across the northern continent. Looks like they're hiding in the mountain regions. Then, that's where we're going. Prep 3 dropships, full tactical teams. We're going in hard and fast. As her crew prepared for insertion, Sarah felt the familiar cold focus settle over her mind. Another mission, another enemy, another chance to prove that humanity would not yield, would not break, would not abandon those under their protection. She was the Iron Heart, the commander who never lost, the woman who made the hard choices so others wouldn't have to. She had no idea that everything she thought she knew about herself was about to change. The dropships screamed through Kepler 442b's atmosphere like falling stars, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they carved through the alien sky. Sarah gripped her harness as the ship bucked and rolled, atmospheric turbulence mixing with evasive maneuvers as the pilot tried to avoid whatever was tracking them from orbit. "Incoming missile locks," shouted the pilot over the intercom. "Multiple contacts, closing fast. Countermeasures." Sarah barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. The dropship shuddered as chaff and flares deployed, followed by the distinctive whine of point defense lasers engaging incoming threats. Through the small porthole beside her seat, she could see streams of exotic energy lancing through the sky, seeking their ship. The other two dropships weren't as lucky. Sarah watched with grim professional detachment as Dropship 2 took a direct hit, its hull peeling open like a flower before the entire craft vanished in a ball of superheated plasma. 12 good soldiers, dead in an instant. She filed the loss away in the cold part of her mind where such things belonged. "Landing zone in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. "It's going to be rough." Sarah keyed her comm to address the surviving members of her strike team. "Listen up. Intelligence was wrong about the scope of this operation. We're dealing with an unknown hostile force with superior technology.
Our mission is threefold: locate and extract Zephyrian survivors, gather intelligence on the enemy, and establish a defensive perimeter for evac.
Questions?
Rules of engagement, Commander, asked Sergeant Martinez, his weathered face visible through his helmet's faceplate. These hostiles targeted civilians and children.
Full weapons free. Show them why humanity has a reputation.
The dropship hit the ground hard, its landing struts buckling before the craft bounced and settled with a grinding crash. Sarah was first out the door, her rifle tracking across the alien landscape as her team deployed around her in practiced formation.
Kepler 442b was beautiful in the way that only untouched worlds could be.
Crystalline formations jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with an opalescent quality that suggested high levels of exotic particles. Under different circumstances, it might have been peaceful. Instead, it was a battlefield. The immediate area around their landing zone was scarred with the distinctive marks of energy weapons. Trees had been flash vaporized, leaving only shadows burned into the ground behind them.
In the distance, smoke rose from what had once been a Zephyrian settlement.
"Contact, 11 o'clock, reported Corporal Jackson, his voice tight with controlled tension.
Sarah turned and saw them.
The enemy moved through the crystalline forest like living shadows, their forms seeming to bend light around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. They were roughly humanoid but wrong somehow, as if someone had tried to recreate human form from a half-remembered description. "Take cover and engage," Sarah ordered, her rifle already tracking toward the nearest target.
The battle was brief and vicious.
The enemy weapons fired beams of coherent energy that seemed to phase in and out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to dodge or predict. But Sarah's team was composed of veterans, soldiers who had fought across a dozen star systems and learned to adapt to any threat.
Human weapons proved effective enough.
The aliens might have superior technology, but they bled and died like any other enemy. Sarah put 3 rounds center mass into the closest target, watching with satisfaction as it crumpled to the ground, its form becoming solid and mundane in death.
"Area secure," reported Martinez after the last hostile went down. "But, Commander, look at this." Sarah approached the alien corpse that Martinez was examining. Up close, the enemy looked even more unsettling.
Its skin had a quality like oil on water, shifting and flowing even in death. More disturbing were the modifications, technological implants that seemed to grow out of its flesh rather than being surgically attached. "Biotech integration," Sarah murmured, kneeling for a closer look.
"Advanced stuff. This isn't just armor or weapons, it's part of them." "Commander, we're receiving a transmission," announced Specialist Torres, the team's communications expert.
"It's weak, but it's definitely Zephyrian.
Patch it through."
The voice that crackled through Sarah's helmet comm was young, female, and terrified.
"Hello? Please, is someone out there? This is Kira. I'm hiding in the old mining complex in Sector 7.
There are others with me, but they're hurt, and the shadow people keep coming back." Sarah felt something twist in her chest, not quite emotion, but perhaps the ghost of what emotions used to feel like. The voice reminded her of her younger sister, dead these 10 years in the bombing of Luna City.
"This is Commander Chen of the human fleet. We're coming for you. Stay hidden and keep transmitting so we can track your signal." "Humans?"
The relief in the young voice was palpable.
"Thank the eternal light. They said humans were just myths, stories to frighten children. But, you're real?"
"We're real," Sarah confirmed, already plotting a route toward Sector 7 on her tactical display.
"And we're very good at what we do."
The journey to the mining complex took them through terrain that grew increasingly surreal. The crystalline formations became larger and more complex, some of them clearly showing signs of recent disturbance.
More troubling were the energy readings. Torres was picking up massive power signatures that seemed to pulse in complex patterns.
"Commander, I don't think this is natural," Torres reported as they paused at the crest of a ridge overlooking a valley filled with towering crystal spires.
"These formations, they're resonating. Like some kind of massive antenna array." Sarah studied the display on her tactical tablet.
The energy patterns were indeed artificial, pulsing in rhythms that suggested communication or coordination. The aliens are using the planet's natural formations to amplify their technology, she concluded. That's how they overwhelmed the Zephyrian defenses so quickly. It was elegant, in a ruthless sort of way. Rather than fighting the planet's natural properties, the invaders had co-opted them, turning the world itself into a weapon. Sarah filed the information away for her report, assuming any of them survived to make one. The mining complex sat in a depression between two massive crystal formations, its prefabricated buildings looking small and fragile against the alien landscape. Sarah's enhanced sensors picked up multiple life signs inside the main structure, as well as the distinctive heat signatures of Zephyrian biology. Movement, warned Jackson, his rifle swinging toward the complex's entrance. The figure that emerged was clearly Zephyrian, tall, graceful, with the characteristic silver-blue skin and large dark eyes of their species. But this one was young, barely more than a child by human standards, and she moved with the careful caution of someone who had learned to expect death at any moment. "Stay back," Sarah ordered her team as the young Zephyrian approached. "Let me handle this." She deactivated her weapon's external targeting laser and lowered her rifle, making her intentions clear. The Zephyrian girl, Kara, presumably stopped about 10 meters away, her large eyes studying Sarah with a mixture of hope and fear. "You're really human?" Kara asked in accented standard. "The stories say your people are giants who eat metal and breathe fire." Despite herself, Sarah almost smiled. "Almost. The stories exaggerate. We're just people who happen to be very good at fighting." "Good," Kara said with surprising firmness. "Because there are others inside who need help, and the shadow people will be back soon." "They always come back." Sarah keyed her calm to address her team. "Martinez, perimeter watch. Jackson and Torres, with me. We're going in." The interior of the mining complex was a testament to Zephyrian resilience. They had turned the abandoned facility into a makeshift shelter, complete with medical stations, food stores, and defensive positions. About 30 survivors huddled in the main chamber, ranging from elderly Zephyrians to children who couldn't have been more than a few years old by human standards. But it was one figure in particular that gave Sarah pause. In the corner of the chamber, surrounded by a small group of younger children, sat another Zephyrian child who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Unlike the others, this one showed no fear of the armored humans. Instead, he looked at Sarah with curiosity and what might have been recognition. "That's Zek," Kara explained, following Sarah's gaze. "He's special. Ever since the shadow people came, he's been saying things. Knowing things he shouldn't know." Sarah approached the child carefully, her professional instincts warring with something she couldn't quite identify. Zek looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for his face, and, when he spoke, his voice carried an odd resonance. "The Iron Lady comes at last," he said in perfect, unaccented standard. "The one who carries the weight of stars on her shoulders. You're here for us, but you don't know why yet." Sarah felt something cold crawl up her spine. "How do you know our language? How do you know about the weight?" Zek interrupted gently. "Because I can see it. All of it. Every choice that carved pieces from your soul, every life you couldn't save, every moment you had to be steel instead of flesh. It's beautiful, in a terrible way." The other Zephyrians were backing away now, clearly as unsettled by the child's words as Sarah was. But Zek just continued to stare at her with those ancient eyes, and Sarah found herself unable to look away. "Commander," Torres's voice crackled through her calm, "we've got movement outside. Multiple contacts, closing fast." The spell was broken. Sarah snapped back into tactical mode, her mind immediately shifting to defensive scenarios. "How many?" "At least a dozen, maybe more. They're using some kind of stealth tech, but our motion sensors are picking up displacement." Sarah turned to address the Zephyrian survivors. "We need to move. Now. Can you travel?" "The wounded can't," Kara replied, gesturing toward several Zephyrians lying on makeshift stretchers. "And the children will slow us down," Sarah finished grimly. It was a cold calculation, but a necessary one. "How long until evac arrives?" 12 hours minimum, reported Torres. "The orbital situation is complicated." 12 hours.
Sarah ran the numbers in her head. Her team could probably hold this position for maybe 2 hours against determined assault. After that, ammunition and power cells would run low, and the aliens would eventually overwhelm them through sheer attrition. It was at that moment that little Zek spoke again, his voice cutting through her tactical calculations like a blade. "You're thinking about odds, about acceptable losses, about who can be saved and who must be sacrificed," he said quietly. "But that's not why you're really here, is it, Sarah Chen?" The use of her first name sent another chill through her. "What are you talking about?" Zek stood up from his corner, his small hand reaching out to touch her armored gauntlet. The moment contact was made, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: warmth. Not physical warmth, but something deeper, something that seemed to reach past her armor, past her training, past all the walls she had built around herself. "You're here because someone needs to remember what it means to be human," Zek said simply. "And you've forgotten, haven't you? Somewhere along the way, you forgot that strength isn't about being steel. It's about choosing to care, even when caring hurts." Sarah jerked her hand away as if burned, but the warmth lingered. For just a moment, she wasn't Commander Chen, the Iron Heart, the woman who never broke. She was just Sarah, alone and scared and carrying more weight than any one person should bear. The moment passed, but something had changed. Sarah looked around at the frightened faces surrounding her, not tactical assets or civilian casualties, but people. Individuals with hopes and fears and loved ones, people who were counting on her not just to complete a mission, but to care enough to save them all. "Torres, get me a direct line to the Retribution," she ordered. "Martinez, I want defensive positions at every entrance. Jackson, inventory our supplies. We're not leaving anyone behind." "Commander?" Martinez's voice held a note of surprise. "That's not tactically sound. If we start deciding who lives and dies based on tactical convenience, we become just another predator," Sarah cut him off. "And I've seen enough predators today." Outside, the shadow people were gathering, and Sarah could feel their alien hunger pressing against the walls of the mining complex. But, inside, something else was growing, not hope, exactly, but determination. The kind of stubborn, irrational human refusal to give up that had carried their species across the galaxy. Sarah looked down at little Zek, who was watching her with approval in his ancient eyes. "You said I forgot what it means to be human," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time I remembered." The first assault came at dusk, when the alien sky turned the color of old blood and the crystalline formations began to resonate with haunting harmonics. Sarah watched through her rifle scope as the shadow people emerged from the crystal forest like living nightmares, their forms shifting and flowing in ways that made her tactical targeting systems struggle to lock on. "Contact front," Martinez called out from his position at the main entrance. "Multiple hostiles, advancing in formation." Sarah keyed her calm to address all positions. "Remember, these things phase in and out of normal space. Lead your targets and fire in bursts. Don't let them close to melee range." The battle erupted across the mining complex's perimeter with the distinctive whine of energy weapons and the sharp crack of human projectiles. Sarah's team had fortified the entrances with salvaged mining equipment, creating choke points that forced the aliens to approach through predetermined kill zones. It was textbook defensive warfare, and, for the first hour, it worked. But the shadow people were learning. "Commander, they're adapting to our tactics," reported Torres from the east entrance. "They're using some kind of coordinated phasing pattern. When one becomes solid to attack, the others phase out to avoid our return fire." Sarah cursed silently. Advanced tactical adaptation in real time suggested either exceptional intelligence or some form of hive-mind coordination. Either way, it meant their defensive position would eventually be overrun through pure attrition. "Fall back to secondary positions," she ordered. "Fighting withdrawal, by the numbers." As her team executed the tactical retreat with professional precision, Sarah found herself glancing toward the main chamber where the Zephyrian civilians waited. They had organized themselves as best they could. The wounded were gathered in the most protected area, while the able-bodied adults had formed a defensive circle around the children. It was Zek who caught her attention, though. The young Zephyrian child sat in the center of the group, his small hands pressed against the floor, his eyes closed in concentration. The other children seemed drawn to him, clustering close as if seeking comfort from his presence. "Kira," Sarah called to the young Zephyrian who had become the unofficial leader of the survivors. "What is he doing?" Kira glanced at Zek with a mixture of awe and concern. "He says he can feel them coming. The shadow people. He's been knowing things, Commander. Things he shouldn't be able to know." Before Sarah could respond, Zek's eyes snapped open, and he looked directly at her with an expression of terrible urgency. "They're not just hunting us," he said, his young voice carrying impossible authority. "They're feeding. Every person they take, every mind they touch, it makes them stronger, smarter. And there's something else coming. Something much worse." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien night air. "What do you mean, something worse?" Zek stood up slowly, his small frame somehow radiating power that made the air around him shimmer. "They're not the real threat, Commander. They're just scouts. Harvesters. The thing that sent them is still out there, watching, learning from everything they report back." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the shadow people were merely advance forces for something even more dangerous, then this entire situation was far beyond what Fleet Command had imagined. The Zephyrian colony wasn't just under attack, it was being studied, catalogued, prepared for something much worse. "Commander!" Jackson's voice crackled through her calm with barely controlled panic. "They're inside the perimeter. I repeat, hostiles have breached the inner defenses." Sarah spun around to see shadow people flowing through the corridors like liquid darkness, their forms shifting between solid and incorporeal as they advanced toward the civilian shelter. Her tactical mind immediately began calculating fields of fire, escape routes, defensive positions, but all the calculations led to the same conclusion. They were out of time and options. "All units, fall back to the main chamber," she ordered. "We make our final stand there." Her team executed the retreat with the desperate efficiency of soldiers who knew they were probably about to die. They fell back in stages, each position held just long enough to buy precious seconds before being abandoned to the advancing aliens. Sarah was the last to retreat from the outer defenses, her rifle spitting death as she covered her team's withdrawal. In the main chamber, 37 Zephyrian civilians huddled together while 4 human soldiers prepared to sell their lives as expensively as possible. Sarah positioned her team at the entrances, knowing it was likely their final deployment. The weight of command had never felt heavier, not just the tactical responsibility, but the knowledge that every person in this room was counting on her to somehow find a miracle. It was then that Zek approached her again, his small hand once more reaching for her armored gauntlet. This time, Sarah didn't pull away. The moment his fingers made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Not pain, exactly, but an overwhelming flood of everything. She could feel the fear of every Zephyrian in the chamber, the grim determination of her soldiers, the alien hunger of the approaching shadow people. But, underneath it all, she felt something else, a vast, patient malevolence watching from the depths of space, ancient beyond human comprehension and utterly hostile to all life. "You feel it now," Zek whispered, his voice somehow audible despite the chaos erupting around them. "The real enemy. It's been watching your species for centuries, waiting for the right moment to harvest everything you are, everything you could become." Sarah gasped, her vision swimming as she struggled to process the alien contact. Through Zek's enhanced perception, she could see the shadow people not as individual entities but as extensions of something vast and terrible, tentacles of a predator that spanned star systems. "Why are you showing me this?" she managed to ask. "Because you need to understand what you're really fighting for," Zek replied. "Not just these people, not just this planet. Everything. Your entire species stands at a crossroads, and the choices made here will echo across the galaxy." The shadow people burst into the main chamber like a tide of living darkness, their forms shifting and phasing as they advanced toward the huddled civilians. Sarah's team opened fire immediately, their weapons strobing in the chamber's dim lighting as they poured everything they had into the alien assault. But there were too many of them, and they kept coming. For every shadow person that fell to human weapons, 2 more seemed to take its place. Sarah watched Martinez go down as an alien weapon punched through his armor, watched Torres disappear beneath a wave of shifting darkness, watched Jackson make a final, desperate stand at the chamber's far end before being overwhelmed.
She was alone now, the last barrier between the aliens and the civilians she had sworn to protect. Her rifle was almost empty, her armor's power cells were failing, and the shadow people were closing in from all sides. By every tactical measure, the situation was hopeless. It was at that moment of absolute despair that Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in over a decade, the simple, irrational human refusal to give up. Not because the odds were good or because she had a clever plan, but because there were children behind her who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. "You want them?" she snarled at the advancing aliens, her empty rifle falling from her hands as she drew her combat knife. "You'll have to go through me first." The shadow people paused, their forms rippling with what might have been confusion. They had faced human tactical brilliance before, had adapted to human technology and strategy. But this was something different, not calculation or clever maneuvering, but simple, stubborn humanity refusing to yield even in the face of impossible odds. Zek's voice reached her across the chamber, calm and clear despite the chaos. "Now you remember, Commander. This is what makes your species special. Not your weapons or your ships or your tactical genius. Your refusal to abandon each other, even when abandonment would be logical." Sarah felt warmth spreading through her chest again, but this time it was different. Not just Zek's alien perception, but something that belonged to her, emotions she had locked away years ago, feelings she had convinced herself were weaknesses. Love for her crew, who had followed her into this impossible situation without question. Compassion for the frightened civilians depending on her protection. Even a kind of fierce joy at finally remembering who she used to be. The shadow people advanced again, but now Sarah met them not as a cold tactical machine, but as a human being fighting for everything she cared about. Her knife flashed in the dim light as she moved between them and the Zephyrians, not calculating odds or conserving energy, but simply refusing to let evil pass. What happened next defied every law of physics Sarah understood. As her renewed humanity blazed like a beacon in the darkness, the crystalline formations outside the mining complex began to resonate with new harmonics. The aliens' own technology, designed to amplify and coordinate their power, suddenly turned against them as it picked up and magnified something they had never encountered before, the pure, undiluted essence of human determination. The effect was immediate and devastating. The shadow people writhed and screamed as their carefully maintained phase states collapsed, their forms becoming solid and vulnerable at the worst possible moment. Several simply tore apart under the stress, their biotech implants overloading in cascade failures that lit up the chamber with explosive flashes. The survivors fled, their alien cries echoing through the complex as they retreated toward the exits. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, her knife still raised, hardly able to believe what had just happened. "How?" she breathed. Zek approached her again, his young face bright with something that might have been pride. "You stopped trying to be a machine and remembered how to be human. Their technology can adapt to weapons and tactics, but they've never encountered anything like human emotional resonance amplified through crystalline matrices. You turned their own tools against them." Sarah looked around the chamber at the surviving Zephyrians, at the bodies of her fallen soldiers, at the impossible situation they had somehow survived. For the first time in years, she felt the urge to cry not from despair, but from a complex mixture of grief, relief, and something that might have been hope. "Is it over?" Kira asked quietly. Sarah shook her head, knowing the truth even as she wished it weren't so. "No. This was just the first wave. But now we know what we're really fighting, and, more importantly, we know how to fight it." She looked down at Zek, this strange child who had somehow awakened something in her that she thought was lost forever. "You said my species stands at a crossroads. What happens now?" Zek smiled, and for a moment he looked like what he was, just a child, brave and scared and hoping for adults to make everything right. "Now you choose, Commander. You can go back to being the Iron Heart, the woman who wins battles through cold calculation. Or you can be Sarah Chen, the human being who refuses to let darkness win. The galaxy needs both kinds of strength." Outside, the alien night was falling silent, but Sarah knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Somewhere in the depths of space, an ancient intelligence was processing what had happened here, adapting its strategies, preparing new horrors to unleash upon the galaxy. But, for the first time in years, Sarah Chen wasn't afraid.
She had remembered something important, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics, but their stubborn refusal to abandon each other, even in the face of impossible odds. The war for the galaxy's future was just beginning, but now she knew how to fight it. Dawn came to Kepler 442b like a revelation, painting the crystal formations in shades of gold and amber that made the alien landscape look almost welcoming. Sarah stood at the mining complex's main entrance, watching the sunrise and trying to process everything that had happened during the night. Her comm unit crackled with intermittent signals from her ship. The orbital battle was ongoing, but the Retribution was holding its own against the alien vessels. "Commander?" Sarah turned to see Kira approaching, her silver-blue features marked with exhaustion but also something that might have been hope. The young Zephyrian carried a steaming cup of what smelled like herbal tea, an offering of hospitality that seemed absurdly normal after the violence of the previous night. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the cup. The warmth felt good against her hands, and the taste was surprisingly pleasant, earthy, with undertones of something like cinnamon. "How are the others?" "Scared, but alive. The injured are stable, and the children." Kara paused, glancing back toward the complex. "They're asking questions. About you, about humans, about what happened last night." Sarah nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. The Zephyrian children had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of the galaxy, not just human military prowess, but something more fundamental about the nature of courage and sacrifice. And Zack? Still sleeping. Whatever he did last night, it exhausted him completely. Kara's expression grew thoughtful. "Commander, what he said about your people standing at a crossroads, do you think it's true?" Before Sarah could answer, her comm unit chirped with an incoming transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Voss's face materialized in holographic projection, his weathered features showing the strain of coordinating a multi-system crisis. "Commander Chen, report status. 37 Zephyrian civilians extracted and secure, sir. We've identified the hostile force as an unknown species with advanced biotech integration and phase-shifting capabilities. They appear to be advanced scouts for a larger threat." The Admiral's expression darkened. "Advanced scouts? Commander, we've received similar reports from 7 other systems. Colony worlds going dark, strange energy readings, survivors reporting shadow attackers. What you encountered isn't an isolated incident." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. 7 systems. If each represented a similar scouting action, then they were looking at a threat of unprecedented scale. "What are your orders, sir?" "Extract the civilians and return to Fleet Station immediately. We're consolidating our forces for a defensive strategy. Every available ship is being recalled." "Sir, with respect, I don't think a defensive strategy will work against these enemies. Their technology adapts too quickly, and they're gathering intelligence for something much larger." Admiral Voss paused, studying her through the holographic display. "You sound different, Commander. More engaged than usual." Sarah glanced back at the mining complex, where she could see Zephyrian children playing in a patch of morning sunlight while their parents stood watch. Such a simple scene, and yet it represented everything worth fighting for. "Perhaps I am, sir. These people reminded me of something I thought I'd forgotten." "And what's that?" "That we're not just soldiers, Admiral. We're humans. And humans don't abandon their friends." The Admiral's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something that might have been approval. "Very well, Commander. Extract the civilians, but I want a full tactical assessment on these shadow people. If they're really advanced scouts, we need to know everything about their capabilities." The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that the war they had all been expecting was finally beginning. Not the familiar conflicts between species competing for resources or territory, but something far more fundamental, a struggle for the very right to exist as free-thinking beings. "Commander Chen?" Sarah turned to find Zek approaching, the young Zephyrian child moving with the careful deliberation of someone still recovering from exhaustion. In the morning light, he looked even younger than before, but his eyes retained that strange depth that seemed to see too much. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Tired, but hopeful, Zek replied, settling down beside her on a piece of salvaged mining equipment. Last night changed something important. Not just in you, but in the balance of things. The enemy wasn't expecting to encounter true human emotional resonance. It confused them, made their coordination systems overload. Sarah studied the child's face, looking for any sign of the alien influence she had felt the night before. But, this morning, Zek seemed entirely himself, just a scared kid who happened to possess impossible knowledge. "You're not entirely Zephyrian, are you?" she asked quietly. Zek smiled, an expression both sad and wise beyond his years. "I'm what happens when two species try to build a bridge across the darkness. My parents were scientists, working on a project to enhance empathic communication between different forms of life. When the Shadow People came, something in their attack unlocked abilities I didn't know I had. And, now I can feel the great web that connects all thinking beings. Every choice, every act of courage or cowardice, every moment of connection or isolation, it all resonates through patterns too complex for normal minds to perceive." Zek paused, looking out at the crystal formations that caught the morning light like prisms. "Your species stands at a crucial point in that web, Commander. What humans choose to do in the coming war will determine whether consciousness itself survives in this galaxy." Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders, but this time it didn't feel like a burden. Instead, it felt like purpose, not just the cold duty she had carried for years, but something warmer and more fundamental. "What do I need to know?" she asked. Zek closed his eyes, his young face growing still with concentration. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. "The enemy calls itself the Convergence. It's ancient beyond your species' ability to comprehend, and it views individual consciousness as an inefficiency to be corrected. For millions of years, it has moved between galaxies, consuming entire civilizations by forcing them into collective unity." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. A predator that consumed civilizations, that treated individual thought as a problem to be solved. It was everything humanity stood against. "How do we fight something like that?" "The same way you fought last night," Zek replied, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. "By refusing to surrender what makes you human. The Convergence can adapt to any weapon, any strategy, any technology. But it has never encountered a species that becomes stronger through diversity, that finds power in individual choice rather than collective unity." Before Sarah could respond, her comm unit came alive with urgent transmissions. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge, massive energy signatures, unknown vessel configurations approaching at high velocity. "Commander, this is the Retribution," came Captain Morrison's voice, tight with controlled tension. "We have a situation. Multiple hostile contacts, far larger than anything we encountered yesterday. They're not responding to hails, and their approach vector suggests hostile intent." Sarah looked at Zek, who nodded grimly. "The real war begins now," he said quietly. Sarah keyed her calm to respond. "Captain, begin evacuation procedures immediately. Get those dropships down here now. We're leaving no one behind." "Commander, the tactical situation, Captain." Sarah's voice carried new authority, not the cold command presence she had wielded for years, but something warmer and more resolute. "I said no one gets left behind. We're humans, and humans don't abandon their people. Make it happen." Over the next hour, Sarah coordinated the most complex extraction operation of her career. 2 functional dropships ferrying 37 Zephyrian civilians, along with the bodies of her fallen soldiers, while alien vessels the size of small moons moved inexorably toward Kepler 442b. Every instinct honed by years of military service told her to prioritize speed over completeness, to leave the wounded and elderly behind to save the majority. Instead, she found herself making different choices. When the loading took longer than expected because elderly Zephyrians needed assistance boarding the dropships, she used the delay to coordinate with her ship's tactical teams, planning defensive positions that could buy precious extra minutes. When one of the Zephyrian children became separated from their parents in the chaos of evacuation, Sarah personally searched the complex until the family was reunited. "Commander, we need to go now," urged the dropship pilot as massive alien vessels began entering the planet's atmosphere. Those things will be in weapons range in 10 minutes.
Sarah performed one final check of the mining complex, ensuring no one had been left behind. In the main chamber where they had made their desperate stand, she found Zek waiting for her.
"You're changing," he observed. "Not just you, but your entire crew. They're watching how you balance duty with compassion, and it's affecting how they see their own roles." Sarah nodded, understanding. Leadership wasn't just about giving orders, it was about demonstrating what values were worth fighting for, even when the situation was desperate. "Will you come with us?" she asked. Zek shook his head sadly. "My place is here, with my people." "But, Commander." He reached out and took her hand one final time, and Sarah felt that familiar warmth spreading through her consciousness. "Remember what you learned here. When the real battle comes, when you're faced with impossible choices, remember that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about choosing to care, even when caring seems like weakness." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was goodbye. She had found something precious on this alien world, not just tactical intelligence about the enemy, but a reminder of who she used to be, who she could still choose to be. The flight back to the Retribution was harrowing. Massive alien vessels moved through the system like living creatures, their organic curves and flowing surfaces suggesting technologies so advanced it bordered on magic. But they didn't pursue the fleeing dropships, instead focusing their attention on the planet's surface. Through the rear viewports, Sarah watched as beams of coherent energy lanced down from orbit, striking the crystal formations with surgical precision. The entire planet began to resonate like a vast musical instrument, harmonics building to frequencies that made her teeth ache even through the dropship's shielding. "They're not destroying it," she realized. "They're tuning it. Turning the entire planet into some kind of massive transmission array." Within hours of reaching the Retribution, Sarah's assessment proved correct. The modified planet began broadcasting signals across multiple dimensions, calling to something vast and patient waiting in the darkness between galaxies. The convergence had established its first foothold in their galaxy, and the real war was about to begin. But, as Sarah stood on the bridge of her ship, watching alien megastructures reshape the world they had just escaped, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the cold calculation of tactical advantage, but genuine human optimism based on the simple truth Zek had helped her remember. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their ships or their military doctrine. It was their refusal to give up on each other, their stubborn insistence that individual consciousness was worth preserving, their willingness to make the hard choices for the right reasons. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when an ancient collective intelligence encountered a species that became stronger through diversity, that found power in individual choice, that refused to abandon their friends even when abandonment would be logical. Sarah smiled grimly as she began composing her report to Fleet Command. The Iron Heart was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, a human being who remembered what she was fighting for. 3 months after the Kepler 442b incident, the galaxy had become a very different place. The Convergence's first wave had struck 17 systems simultaneously, each attack perfectly coordinated to maximize psychological impact while gathering intelligence on local defensive capabilities. What they learned from those encounters should have spelled doom for every free-thinking species in the galaxy. Instead, it marked the beginning of their first serious setback in millions of years. Sarah stood in the command center of Fleet Station Omega, watching tactical displays that showed the current state of the war with a mixture of professional satisfaction and deep personal concern. The humans had done what they did best: they had adapted, improvised, and refused to accept defeat as an option. But the cost was mounting, and every day brought new reports of worlds under siege. Commander Chen, incoming priority transmission from the Zephyrian Council, announced Communications Officer Hayes, now sporting a promotion pin and a confidence that hadn't been there before the Kepler mission. "Put it through, Lieutenant Commander Hayes," Sarah replied, noting how the young officer straightened with pride at the acknowledgement of his new rank. The holographic projection that materialized before her showed the distinctive silver-blue features of Chancellor Yelaketh, one of the Zephyrians they had rescued from Kepler 442b. But, where Sarah remembered a terrified civilian, she now saw a determined leader whose eyes held the same resolve she recognized in her own mirror. "Commander Chen, we have news from the Outer Rim territories. The Convergence has begun its second phase operations, but there's something you need to know." They're avoiding systems where human forces are present, even when those systems would be tactically advantageous to capture. Sarah leaned forward, her tactical mind immediately recognizing the implications. They're afraid of us. After Kepler, they've identified humanity as a priority threat. More than that, Chancellor Keth continued. Our intelligence networks suggest they're attempting to develop countermeasures specifically designed to combat human emotional resonance. They understand that your species represents something they cannot simply assimilate or adapt to. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with thoughts that carried both triumph and trepidation. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had forced an ancient galactic predator to change its tactics out of genuine concern for human capabilities. But that same success had painted a target on every human world in the galaxy. "Commander, you have visitors," announced her aide, Corporal Jackson. The young man had requested transfer to her staff after the Kepler mission, claiming he wanted to serve under an officer who remembered what we're really fighting for. Sarah looked up to see two familiar figures entering her office. Admiral Voss approached with his usual military bearing, but behind him walked a small Zephyrian child whose presence immediately transformed the sterile command center into something warmer. "Zach?" Sarah's professional composure cracked as she saw the young alien who had changed her life in ways she was still discovering. "What are you doing here?" The child smiled, and Sarah was struck by how much more normal he seemed away from the crisis on Kepler. Still preternaturally wise, but more recognizably a child who happened to possess impossible insights. "The Zephyrian Council asked me to serve as a liaison," Zek explained. "My abilities have proven useful in coordinating multi-species defensive efforts. But, honestly, I wanted to see how you were doing." Admiral Voss cleared his throat, drawing Sarah's attention back to military matters. "Commander, we need to discuss the implications of what happened on Kepler. Your tactical report mentioned something called emotional resonance warfare. I need to understand exactly what that means for our strategic planning." Sarah looked between the Admiral and Zek, recognizing that this conversation would determine not just human military doctrine, but potentially the future of consciousness itself in their galaxy. "Sir, what we discovered on Kepler is that the Convergence's technology is designed to interface with collective intelligence structures. Their ships, their weapons, their coordination systems, everything is built around the assumption that sapient species naturally organize into hive minds or collective consciousness networks. But humans don't work that way," Admiral Voss observed. "Exactly. Human consciousness is fundamentally individual, but our strength comes from choosing to connect with others while maintaining our separate identities. When that individual emotional energy is amplified through the right medium, like the crystal formations on Kepler, it creates feedback patterns that the Convergence's technology simply cannot process." Zek nodded approvingly. "Think of it like this, Admiral. The Convergence is like a predator that has spent millions of years learning to hunt herds. They understand how to scatter collective consciousness, how to isolate and consume group minds. But humanity doesn't form herds, you form packs. Individuals who choose to stand together while remaining fundamentally separate." Admiral Voss was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face showing the strain of processing implications that stretched far beyond normal military planning. "Commander, are you telling me that our entire species' survival depends on soldiers learning to feel more deeply rather than maintaining professional emotional distance?" Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions, fear at the responsibility, pride at what they had discovered, and something deeper that might have been hope. "I'm saying that our survival depends on remembering that we're not just weapons, sir. We're human beings who happen to be very good at fighting. The moment we lose that distinction, we become vulnerable to exactly the kind of assimilation the Convergence specializes in." Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself at the center of a revolution in human military doctrine. Traditional training emphasized emotional suppression, tactical detachment, professional distance from civilian populations. The new protocols, dubbed resonance warfare by Fleet Command, taught soldiers to maintain their emotional connections while channeling those feelings into tactical effectiveness. It wasn't easy. Generations of military training had to be unlearned and rebuilt from the ground up. Sarah worked with Zek and a team of Zephyrian psychologists to develop techniques that allowed human soldiers to remain tactically effective while accessing the emotional resonance that made them so dangerous to Convergence technology. The first field test came sooner than anyone expected. "Commander, emergency transmission from the Proxima defense grid," announced Hayes, his voice tight with controlled tension. "They're under full assault by convergence forces. Estimated time to planetary bombardment, 6 hours." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Proxima Centauri was home to over 50 million humans, making it the second largest human colony in the galaxy. Its loss would be devastating not just tactically, but psychologically, proof that humanity could be overwhelmed despite their new understanding of resonance warfare. "Prep the fleet for immediate deployment," she ordered. "All ships, all crews. We're going in." Admiral Voss appeared at her shoulder, his expression grim but determined. "Commander, the tactical situation at Proxima is hopeless. The convergence has brought forces equivalent to what they used to conquer entire sectors. Even with resonance warfare, we can't match that kind of firepower." Sarah looked at the tactical display, running the numbers with the cold precision that had made her reputation. Admiral Voss was right. By every conventional measure, the mission was suicide. They would be outnumbered 50-1, outgunned by orders of magnitude, facing an enemy that had spent months developing countermeasures specifically designed to combat human tactics. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that the old Sarah Chen would have approached with calculated detachment, making hard choices about acceptable losses and tactical priorities. But that Sarah had died on Kepler 442b, replaced by someone who understood that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their tactical brilliance, it was their refusal to abandon each other. "Admiral, do you remember what you taught me at the Academy about the nature of courage?" Sarah asked. The older man's expression shifted, recognition flickering in his eyes. "That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear for the sake of something greater than yourself. 50 million human beings are about to die unless someone stands between them and the darkness," Sarah said quietly. "Not because we can guarantee victory, not because the odds are good, but because there are people and abandoning them would make us something other than human." Admiral Voss was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "How long do you need to prep the fleet?" "Give me 2 hours, sir." "And, Admiral?" Sarah paused, feeling the weight of everything she had learned about command, about humanity, about the cost of caring. "Make sure every crew member understands what we're really fighting for. Not tactical objectives or strategic advantages, but the right of every thinking being to remain individual while choosing to stand together." The Battle of Proxima Centauri became the stuff of legend, not because of its tactical brilliance or technological innovation, but because of what it revealed about the true nature of human strength. 37 human warships faced down a convergence fleet that stretched across half the solar system, their crews united not by military discipline but by the simple, stubborn human refusal to let evil triumph. What happened next defied every law of physics and military science the galaxy understood. As human crews across the fleet opened themselves to the full emotional impact of what they were fighting for, homes, families, friends, the simple right to exist as free-thinking beings, their individual consciousness began to resonate in harmony with each other. Not merging into a collective like the convergence expected, but creating something unprecedented, a network of individual wills united by choice rather than compulsion. The effect on convergence technology was catastrophic. Their ships, designed to interface with collective consciousness networks, found themselves trying to process 37 separate but harmoniously aligned individual minds. The feedback overloaded their coordination systems, caused their weapons to misfire, and ultimately forced them to retreat from a battle they should have won in minutes. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Retribution as the alien fleet fled into hyperspace, leaving Proxima Centauri free and the human fleet victorious against impossible odds. Around her, her crew cheered and embraced, tears streaming down faces that had been professionally stoic just hours before. "Commander," Zek's voice came through her personal calm, speaking from the refugee center where he had been helping coordinate civilian evacuation. "You did it. You didn't just save Proxima, you proved something that will echo across the galaxy. Individual consciousness choosing unity is infinitely stronger than consciousness forced into uniformity." Sarah felt emotions she couldn't even name flooding through her: pride, relief, love for her crew, hope for the future, and, underneath it all, a profound sense of completion. She had found her way back to herself, rediscovered what it meant to be human rather than just a weapon in human form.
Months later, as reports came in from across the galaxy of convergence forces retreating in confusion wherever they encountered human-led coalitions, Sarah realized that Zek had been right about humanity standing at a crossroads. They had chosen their path, not the cold efficiency of tactical machines, but the warm strength of conscious beings who refused to surrender their individuality even as they chose to stand together. The war was far from over. The convergence was ancient and patient, and it would adapt to this new challenge as it had adapted to so many others over millions of years. But, for the first time since the conflict began, the outcome was genuinely in doubt. Humanity had remembered what made them human, and, in doing so, they had given consciousness itself a fighting chance in the galaxy. The Iron Heart had become something far more dangerous, a human being who understood that true strength came not from being unbreakable, but from choosing to care even when caring hurt. As Sarah stood in her quarters aboard the Retribution, looking out at stars that no longer seemed cold and distant but warm with possibility, she thought about a small Zephyrian child who had taught her the most important lesson of her life, that redemption wasn't about changing who you were, but about remembering who you had always been underneath all the armor. The galaxy was still dangerous, still full of threats that would test humanity's resolve in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But now they faced those challenges not as cold tactical machines, but as human beings, flawed, emotional, individual, and absolutely unwilling to abandon each other. It was, Sarah realized with a smile, exactly the kind of strength that could change the universe.